In today's world, we are increasingly dependent on technology. Our business and personal lives rely on it, but as you've probably noticed, it's unreliable. Our computers are slow, so we end up squinting at smartphones and tablets. The jokers we pay to fix our stuff have no clue what they're doing. We live in constant fear that something's going to happen to our personal data. So we're scared into paying for fake protection that proves useless when disaster strikes. Update attacks, fake Wi-Fi, cloud control, intelligent, successful people feel intimidated by the chaos and think it's somehow their fault. If they only knew what the industry was doing to them, they'd get torches and pitchforks. If only we had someone to explain it all in plain English so we can start protecting ourselves. Oh wait, we do! It's the Computer Exorcist Podcast with your host, Marc Anthony Arena.
From the Wallace Memorial microphone in my home office, overlooking the can of worms in downtown Rochester, New York, this is the Computer Exorcist Podcast. My name is Marc Anthony Arena. I'm so glad you have joined me here today. And as always, we'll have a fascinating show for you. Today, it's just me. After a long string of fascinating interviews, I hope you liked all those people I interviewed. But these articles ain't gonna read themselves, so we still got the backlog of articles in the briefcase to deal with. And so I spent some time narrowing them down and picking out a few good ones. So this is interesting because the other day, my dad gave me an article from Electrical Contractor Magazine, as he often does. He's an electrical contractor, he knows I like computers, and remember, he taught me a lot of these basic concepts when I was growing up. So I learned about voltage and amperage and impedance and connectors, right? Back then, people obeyed industrial standards. We had 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch connectors, and that's how it worked. And any brand, any model across space and time would all obey these standards, these eternal standards. It was beautiful, right? RCA connectors, DIN connectors, and IEC power plugs, right? These were all standards that people actually obeyed and cared about. And you could have a TV that was from the early 80s and you can connect it to a video game console from the late 90s and it worked, right? Even a DVD player from the 2000s. They all obeyed RCA connectors. So you didn't have the daily problems that we have today, where because people in the industry have chaotic minds and they have no self-control, things used to just work across space and time. And now the standards change every week. Either they're ultra-proprietary standards because the people in these companies are jealous of each other and they all want to win. They all want to be a monopoly. So instead of having interoperability, where things operate among any brand, right? I can have any brand of VCR hooked to any brand of TV. But in this day and age, it's extreme proprietary setups, where if you buy Apple computers, you have to have Apple socks, Apple underwear, Apple toothbrush in order to live. So that's the deal. And so he just hands me articles whenever he sees one, and he thinks that I still like this stuff, but I don't. It's all chaotic now. But the point is, he gave me this article, and I'm here to teach you about it. And I found something really, really interesting, right? So in these newer articles of Electrical Contractor Magazine, in these 21st century articles, it's about how to scramble to keep up with all this technology, right? And again, it's all ultra proprietary. So these electrical contractors aren't installing standard 110 and 220 things anymore. They're installing these evil integrated systems that are all ultra proprietary. So it causes chaos. The fact that these things are all ultra proprietary, where you have to buy a head unit from a company and you have to buy all the sensors from the same company and everything has to be exact, and it'll only work with that model. It's you can't even interoperate things across the same company. So this magazine went from describing industrial standards in the old days to, okay, we have to scramble to keep up with all this technology. The other thing that they think they need to keep up with is the cloud. So they think that, well, everything cloud is inevitable and we just have to give in, right? So these poor electricians, these electrical contractors are just, again, scrambling to keep up, and they have to deal with this chaos. And these poor people think that it's just the way of the world and there's nothing anyone can do about it. No one ever, ever, ever stops and thinks, hey, why are we doing this? So here's something interesting. He gave me this article, and it talks about systems integration, and I thought, what am I going to do with this, right? It's an article from 2024, and I thought, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to relate this to my show? Usually I read it and then I bark about it, but then it just happened to be a coincidence that I had a couple other articles that were very, very relevant. So we're going to do that now. We're going to talk about those. And it's all going to make sense in a few seconds here, folks. It's all going to make beautiful sense. It just happened to be a coincidence that I found a couple articles, and it's just going to work so perfectly. So here we go. Electrical Contractor Magazine, December 2024. Thanks to my dad. Conquering systems integration. Master these technologies for security success. Digital and network technologies are the command and control infrastructure of the future and have bestowed intelligence that parlays into new, easy-to-deploy security solutions. Again, it might be easy to deploy, easy to install, but a couple years from now, you'll have to rip out the whole system because it's all ultra-proprietary, and none of it uses interchangeable parts. Data is as specific as the user needs to be, which can help make premises safer and save time and money. And the end user still prefers a single service provider. So in other words, data is specific as the user needs to be, so people want chaotic features. Actually, nobody wants these features, but manufacturers add trillions of features on every new model of every new product, making you think that you need them, and making these installer dudes think that people want them. Not always the case. No one wants this glut of features. The other thing they say, the end user still prefers a single service provider. Okay, fine. They're just saying that the customer, let's say the building owner, doesn't want to deal with several vendors. They want to deal with you, the electrical contractor, for the installation, repair, maintenance. And unfortunately, these hyper-proprietary systems also come with eternal, ongoing maintenance, okay? Leveraging the cloud. Cloud management platforms are your control and management interface for video, access control, intrusion, energy management, and other integrations. They're also increasingly used in building management, okay? Accessibility and the ability to share data and video images and alerts in real time to mobile devices gives users up-to-date information. Again, that's Jenga, right? These features, accessibility and features and features. No one wants these features. 99% of the clients I come across have no clue how to work 99% of the features. They just want a security camera and that's it. And no one can figure out any of this garbage because it's increasingly complex. So here's something interesting though. Notice how they're saying cloud management platforms, okay? Let's say you had a home automation system from the 80s. Those were proprietary, okay? And when those died, it was hard to find parts for them, okay? Because you couldn't just get a standard part, like a standard camera or a standard control box or whatever. It had to be that brand and that model and that system compatible with that scheme. So let's make it worse. So the modern stuff is not only ultra-proprietary and difficult to repair, but it's also controlled by the cloud, just like the Sonos I always bark about. If your 80s home automation system came from a brand that went out of business, no big deal, your house still functions. But with the new stuff, all of it depends on cloud management. So chances are when you turn on that product, that security management system, and that company goes out of business tomorrow, ta-da, nothing works because all of it is remote controlled by the cloud, okay? So I hope some electrical contractors out there tell their people about this, because they're reading this magazine and they're thinking, I was told cloud is good, I was told proprietary is good, but they have no idea that it's actually a time bomb. It's actually a Ponzi scheme, right? These companies have to sell enough of these products to keep their servers going so that their servers can control the products. I should submit this episode to EC Magazine. So through a cloud platform, and so let's see, through the cloud, which essentially is an offsite server, which you don't have to maintain, and that is nice that it's an offsite server you don't have to maintain, but again, when they go belly up, all your products go belly up. You'll have access to an array of services for the customer, and anywhere from an internet connection. Through systems integrators, it means you can provide remote managing and monitoring. In other words, eternal fees. You can milk them for eternal fees. Through a cloud platform software program, new ID profiles and permissions for access control can be added quickly and virtually, right? If you're an ultra-suspicious building owner, you can have trillions of permissions and controls. And don't worry, folks. Remember, I've got a couple very relevant articles here, so yeah, don't you worry. It's going to get good. The cloud also keeps your system current with automatic software updates and cybersecurity controls, right? So software updates can cook your products and roast your products and destroy them and make them slower and more complicated. And cybersecurity controls. How does that work out? How well do those work? Do you think cybersecurity actually helps anything? No, it actually requires building more stable products, right? Cybersecurity just means playing whack-a-mole with garbage products that are out there that have holes all over them. Oh, it includes a subscription service, which you can mark up to the customer, right? Add-ons, subscriptions. Who needed a subscription in the 80s for a video camera? All right, and I want to note something, that these home security DVRs are pretty good because currently, at least, they don't depend on the cloud. They don't depend on the factory. A lot of factories have gone belly up that have made these security cameras, and it's okay. You have a head unit that's in your office, let's say, in your headquarter office, but it usually relies on universal cameras. It doesn't require proprietary cameras, and it doesn't live or function based on the cloud. So again, the companies go belly up, no big deal. Basic security DVRs are still pretty cool. All right? But apparently they're pushing all this other stuff here. Cameras with artificial intelligence and analytics can be a game changer. They can pinpoint intrusions and identify security weaknesses. In other words, yet another way for AI to seep into the cracks, right? To seep into society and make us dumber. And blow false alarms, okay? And make the world a little more paranoid. With the ability to detect people, license plate numbers, objects, and specific characteristics, they can prevent an intrusion before it escalates into a threat. It can be programmed to count specific objects, like student buses arriving on game days, right? Tighten those controls. Tighten the controls. More cameras. More microcontrol, as I call it. Cyber wars. Cybersecurity mandates to grow. Cyber wars are escalating, and no system integration business is precluded from offering secure products. Zero trust is a directive. Executive order in May of 2021, and directed at improving the nation's cybersecurity against increasingly sophisticated malicious cyber campaigns. Zero trust is based on the idea that no person or system should be trusted. So the zero trust is a scandal, and some pea-brains in 2021, some lawmaker pea-brain, thought that zero trust equals good because Microsoft says zero trust is good. And it means don't trust your employees. So what does that mean? It means consolidation of power, concentrate more power in the central office so that your employees are simply automata and can be replaced with AI pretty quickly. So eventually we're headed toward a world, folks. Right now we live in a world that is ruled by Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon and so on, right? These big tech companies. But pretty soon, even the employees will be utterly helpless because of the zero trust scandal, which means the employees have no power to do anything anymore. They are now anti-empowered. One good thing I learned when I was at RIT is employee empowerment. So the zero trust scandal removes power from these employees and concentrates the power in one central server. Okay? So in reality, none of this zero trust scandal should be used, and more people should be empowered. Regulations are anticipated as physical and logical security continues to converge. All right, so that means physical and logical security, all right? Physical security means your door locks, right? Those are now controlled by logical things, in other words, software, okay? Which software in the 80s was about logic and logical, right? And, or, and XOR, and XNOR, gates, and all that. Logic, it just means simple logic. But now software is utter garbage. And you don't think any of this stuff can fail, right? Physical and logical security. How many movies are there where the computerized access control systems go down, right? So the entire solution, systems and sensors and software and input and output, must satisfy zero trust compliance. Well, that certainly helped, right? Again, zero trust was mandated by some pea-brain in the government in 2021. And look how much that's helped. Look at all your cybersecurity incidents. Now, hey, I want to point out something actually very important. That these pea-brains at this magazine don't understand, is that now that you have everything connected, now that you worship the cloud for some dumb feature that you don't need, now bad guys can break into your system. And bad guys can let themselves into any door in your building. Hello, no one's ever thought of that. Why are you exposing yourself to this threat, folks? Why? Because some sales joker dangled these features in front of you that you didn't need? So connected equals vulnerable. How's that for simple? I'm actually going to write that. Maybe that'll be the title of this episode. All right, I spent way too long on that first article, but the other two, look. Wait till you see. All right, so in response to those other two, okay? What could possibly go wrong, right? What could possibly go wrong? I'm going to tell you what goes wrong if you listen to this article and if you implement the things this article recommends. BusinessInsider.com, 2021. Facebook employees reportedly couldn't access conference rooms and other systems amid widespread outage. Facebook employees are locked out of buildings and conference rooms and a massive outage. And I remember commenting on this back when it happened a few years back, but I just love how it's so relevant to that article we just finished reading. Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp all went dark at 11:45 because, right, Facebook gobbled Instagram and WhatsApp and then amalgamated them into their systems. So now not only is the one company shut down because it's all zero trust and it's all centrally controlled, cloud controlled, but also they control their divisions, their other company divisions with the same thing. Okay, it's what Frank Herbert in the Dune series called a single point of failure. Okay, apparently not enough of these software programmers really understood the point of Dune. I bet a lot of them read the Dune book, but they don't understand the point of Dune. The point of Dune was to warn people about consolidation of power and single points of failure. Facebook employees are struggling to access office systems, right? Because they're anti-empowered. They probably don't have in case of emergency, break glass, real physical key. Some showed up at the office to evaluate the extent of the outage, but were locked out of the buildings because their badges weren't working. It's mayhem over here. All internal systems are down too. Facebook employees are communicating internally via text message and Outlook email. All right, in other words, separate, disconnected services. Imagine if Facebook said, we're going to have all our email controlled by our security system because we read Electrical Contractor Magazine and they told us it was good. All right, so obviously someone was poisoned enough by this cloud garbage to implement a security system at Facebook that was centrally controlled, that had zero trust, and controlled all three of those major corporations. All from a single server. And even the website was down. So apparently this evil cloud stuff depended on the name facebook.com to operate. Okay, so the evil cloud stuff, if you're going to implement evil cloud cameras and evil cloud access systems, at least have them operate completely independently of your website, as opposed to depending on your website, right? Again, if you connect all this stuff together, someone can just break it in one fell swoop, and all of it breaks together, right? Think about all those Godzilla kind of movies, right? Where it's like, oh, if we find that Achilles heel. So basically, you're creating an Achilles heel. You're creating a giant Achilles heel, a giant point of failure. All right, so it's mayhem over here, and all internal systems are down too. All right, take that quote and think about that in terms of what the prior article told us to do. All right, so call Electrical Contractor Magazine and tell them about this article where Facebook said it's mayhem over here and all internal systems are down too. Okay, another one. Okay, another one very relevant, right? Again, what could possibly go wrong? Well, carandriver.com 2021. Pennsylvania Turnpike drivers rack up $100 million in unpaid tolls. Over $104 million in tolls generated from the Pennsylvania Turnpike went uncollected in 2020, okay? And here's what's going on. They had lazy slob lawmakers who spent billions of dollars on these evil cloud-controlled, AI-controlled, camera-controlled toll booths, right? Instead of hiring a human being who needs a job. Instead, I had a buddy who came to this country, and his dad was a toll booth guy, right? I know plenty of people who, that's how they make their living. They're toll booth collectors, right? And you know, it was nice. It was nice to see a human being, especially on a lonely day, right? It was nice to hand your dollars and your quarters to someone and say, hey, how you doing? Have a nice day, right? But they replaced all of that. They replaced all of that with billion and trillion dollar AI-controlled cameras, okay? And and they did it in New York State as well, right? Because New York loves falling for anything, jumping on bandwagons and following people off cliffs. So New York did it during COVID, where they got rid of the people, and now those people are probably home getting free money and not doing anything with their lives. And then this camera system set up. 11 million out of the 170 million turnpike rides, nearly 6.5% went unpaid last year. The biggest reason? Because people just don't pay the charges, right? You get a thing in the mail, or you get a thing in your email or whatever, you're not going to pay that, right? With the toll booth, you had to pay the person immediately. You had to hand them a couple dollars right then and there, and then you were done. You were done. That was it. There was no complication. There was no collections. There was no 6.5% of people not paying, right? So that's, cloud always brings injustice, right? Ultra complex technology always brings with it injustice, where all of a sudden a good portion of the people just aren't paying because whatever, too bad, it's so complex, we'll get away with it. All right. The Pennsylvania Turnpike switched to a purely automated toll collection system driven by COVID. 93% are paid by EasyPass. The other 7% are billed by toll by plate, where they take a picture of your license plate and mail you a bill. And look, at least I've resisted the EasyPass garbage, because that actually, in New Jersey, they've been doing this for 20 years now, where if you have EasyPass in New Jersey, they are recording how fast it takes you to get from one to the other. Right? With a toll booth, they don't know or care. They don't calculate that. You just hand them a paper ticket and give them $1. But with EasyPass, they can calculate how long it took you to get from exit 7 to exit 8 or 7 to 10. And they can calculate if you were speeding. So that's very creepy. They've been doing that forever. But I'm still thrilled. So, I mean, now they could do that to everybody, right? even the toll by plate. But I still do the toll by plate as opposed to Easy Pass, because any way you can possibly resist this frog in a boiling pot thing is what I encourage. So I still mail them a paper check. They mail me a paper bill, I mail them a paper check. It keeps them honest, right? As opposed to all this electronic stuff, which might be convenient on the face of it, but really it's ultra complicated and it's highly unjust. I had a situation a couple of years ago where I was going through a toll booth thing, and the lady said, well, it's too bad for you, right? It was massively difficult to find a phone number where you could call and defend yourself, right? So if you can't defend yourself, if someone took an incorrect picture of your car and it wasn't you, or you were billed incorrectly or something, it's just sorry, too bad. You have no recourse. And now, instead of, let's say, paying, in the old days, if you lost your ticket on the thruway, you just paid the whole thing, because they said, look, we can't prove which exit you went to. Fine, so you just pay the whole $20 or whatever and you're done. But with this, they send people after you and they revoke your driver's license, okay? So you could have some false alarm and it revokes your license. I had a client, I think I talked about this on the show last year, I had a client who had vanity plates and someone else used to have the same plates. And of course, that 1931 era database in Albany, of course, was screwed up. So they were billing this guy for somebody else, for someone else's license plate, right? You'd probably be surprised. It's going to start coming out now how many people have the same license plate and how many of these billing errors are made, okay? It's not just the uncollected toll, but the billing errors, right? If you put P-Brains in Albany in charge of anything, they're going to screw it up. Last summer, I went to Philadelphia, and they mailed me a bill afterward, right? This Pennsylvania Turnpike toll system mailed me a bill, and it was like $75 because I drove from Rochester down to Philadelphia, and then I crossed over into New Jersey to visit my relatives and friends, and I came back across, and yeah, I got home a week later, they mailed me a bill for $75. I'm like, what the heck is this? Apparently that's the cost now to drive through a major city. So Is anyone else creeped out by this, where for the first time ever they know where you are, right? And it's really they micro control, right? Again, there's a lot of injustice here, okay? Is anyone else creeped out by that? For the first time ever in my life, I can't just drive somewhere and hand someone $1. They now know where I am at all times. And that brings up another really interesting point, right? Because again, all of this stuff is carried under the banner of convenience, right? And accuracy. But in reality, it's extreme injustice. Let me explain this, okay? Last December, when my car was stolen, it took a month to find it, right? They don't micro-control the thieves, but they'll micro-control me. So here I am on a road trip trying to go on my speaking tour, and they know where I am at all times, and they'll bill me for everywhere I drive. But when my car is stolen and kept in the ghetto, couldn't find it. Okay? They couldn't find it. And that's interesting how that works, right? Where they actually need the technology, they're not bothering, but they're micro-controlling the actual rightful owners of the cars, but they don't micro-control the thieves, all right? So those are some comments on there. Anyway, the uncollected fees are just written off after 3 years. There was a system that suspends Pennsylvania registrations for 6 or more unpaid tolls, but has yet to implement a system to similarly penalize drivers from out of state. They're working with Delaware and New York, of course. And New York loves punishing anyone they possibly can. And side note, maybe they just don't have your correct address. Again, there's so many possibilities for abuse and so many possibilities for error. All right? They could just have the wrong address on file for me, and I'll be punished, and they'll take away my license, right? Or they'll arrest me or something. So 1.8 million rides went unpaid because license plates could not be identified, right? None of these computer scumbags ever think about consequences. Actually, so this is a real formula for failure here. Computer joker plus P-brain lawmaker equals this chaos. 41% of those failures were based on obstruction, such as a bike rack or trailer. 1.5 million tolls went uncollected because motor vehicle agencies failed to provide addresses for owners, right? So let's say I'm from Oklahoma, and then PA calls Oklahoma and says, hey, we have this license plate ABC123, and Oklahoma just doesn't provide it. And in just over 1 million instances, bills sent out went undeliverable. Okay, again, they have the wrong address. Look, I used to enjoy talking to the toll booth workers, and apparently the other time I called New York actually to contest one of them, and the lady said, well, a bunch of toll booth workers were being killed. Maybe that's the case, all right? I don't know. But I don't remember ever seeing a toll booth worker being killed in the news, right? Every day, everyone in New York State is shot or killed or something. And there's always chaos and terror and tragedy in the news because that's the only thing that happens in New York here. But I've never heard of a toll booth worker getting run over or killed. So I think it was just an excuse that the computer guys and the lawmakers got together and used and started telling people, like telling the toll booth workers and whatever. Maybe it's me. But my whole conclusion with this article is simply that people are willing to pay anything for real human service. Okay, my clients are willing to pay me to have me show up as a human being in their house and defend them against technology. And it's the same thing here. I wouldn't mind paying higher fees to have a real human being, right? Offer the option, for crying out loud, right? Most people are going to go for the electronic tolling because they're impatient and it's faster, fine. But have one toll booth with a human being in case I want to pay cash, right? How about that? Allow for what they call the deprecated, allow for the obsolete technology, have a loophole, right? Give you another example. As an LLC, as a small business, luckily New York says, look, most people should file electronically with QuickBooks, but they do allow me to mail in my handwritten, I print it out and handwrite it, my application for, I think it's one of the yearly fees. Every year and every 2 years they have LLC fees. So they still allow for old folks like us. So again here, to sum it up here, we have this article from Electrical Contractor Magazine that talks about cloud control and AI control and automation control. And then I talked about, number one, the chaos that happens when it all goes down, and number two, the injustice that happens when you have an electronically controlled toll booth system, right? None of these people ever think about the consequences. So we have one article talking about singing its praises, and two articles showing the reality, the results in reality when you implement such complex systems. Oh, and I bet you anything, especially the New York electronic tolling system cost billions of dollars. It was probably more expensive than having human beings, and some programmer scumbag walks away with the money instead of normal humans who actually need a job. And 2 weeks from now, all of that equipment will become obsolete, and you can't just upgrade the head unit. No, you have to upgrade all of the everything every couple of years. So now, instead of paying, let's say, 100 people $40,000 a year, now you're paying $1 billion every 3 years, let's say. So it just doesn't add up. All of this stuff is predicated on a lie that somehow you're going to save time, money, and effort. In reality, it's just chaos. And imagine someone can now break into the toll system, by the way. It's all electronically connected to the cloud and the internet instead of having a closed circuit system. It's all cloud connected. And actually a couple weeks ago, the New York State toll system went down for maintenance, probably because the jokers had to install Windows updates or something. None of this stuff is controlled by anything reliable, right? It's controlled by Microsoft Windows computers, I bet you anything. So, connection equals chaos. Connection equals vulnerability. That's it for today. Hope you loved our episode. Tell your friends about the show, thecomputerexorcist.com, to buy my book and to buy a preview edition of my forthcoming book. We'll talk to you next week.